Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
The distinction that you can make between yourself and the other guy, between your product and the competitors, is the relationship that you have with the person that you're selling to. Are you selling in order to sell, or are you selling in order to serve?
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
Well, I'm Aaron Schmookler, co-founder and trainer at the Yes Works, where we provide training and support to teams to grow world-class collaboration and world-class communication so that they can maximize their profits, attain, and so that they can find fulfillment together in work.
On this episode of the show, the legend that is Aaron, we're diving into whether we really need relationships to win B2B deals, contracts, and to drive revenue. Whether we really need to have know, like, and trust, which is so cliche and we talk about all the time. Whether that's really needed in the world of B2B sales, and a whole lot more. So let's jump right in. Today, I think there's going to be multiple questions that will be answered, or there'll be definitely lots of questions asked. But the question I'd like to start to answer at the top of the show is whether we should throw out our sales relationships, our business relationships, what that means. But I guess to tee all this up, Aaron, do we need to, right now in the economic climate that we live in, do we need to have a relationship in place, a quote-unquote relationship, to be able to drive revenue and to do a deal with someone?
Well, if you put it like that, in that binary function, no, you don't need a relationship in the sense that you may be imagining. You know, we don't need to go out and have wine and beer and tee off at the golf course. And I'll posit that in this day and age, when so much can be bought online through a bot or through an online ordering form, you are going to have a relationship. As soon as you and I start to converse, as soon as I have a response to something that you've said or vice versa, we've got a relationship. So the question is, are you going to have a default relationship, or are you going to have a deliberate, purposeful, meaningful relationship that's worth the term?
Well, let me ask this in a different way. I never really thought about it this way before, but should we have a relationship that we are trying to influence and make better, or is a default relationship good enough? And then especially if we're starting to pile on the value business-wise as opposed to the value relationship-wise.
Right. Well, more and more, it's harder to distinguish ourselves. It's harder to say this product is different from, or even this, especially this product is better than, or this service is better than that other one. So I think increasingly the distinction that you can make between yourself and the other guy, between your product and the competitors, really is the relationship that you have with the person that you're selling to. Are you selling in order to sell, or are you selling in order to serve? And when you really have that service mentality, you get deeper and deeper into the personal interests, into the life, into the business goals, both long-term and short-term. And so you become a more valuable person, because forget having a differentiated product. Those days are largely gone.
I've got a reasonably good example of this, and it was a chap called Pat Flynn I had on the podcast years ago now. And I've followed Pat since he was kind of a fledgling entrepreneur, and he's doing kind of 100 grand, 200 grand a month in revenue right now. He's killing it. And I was asking him about training and workshops and courses. And this is before I launched the first version of the sales school. And he gave me some really important advice. And I was hesitating on, because obviously pulling focus away from the podcast and growing that and growing a product, you can only do so many things at once. And so one would suffer to build the other. So this is what I was throwing at him. And kind of off the record, he said, well, and my issue was that there's many sales training products out there. I'm clearly kind of on the path of helping other people be a sales trainer by interviewing legends like yourself, Aaron, as opposed to doing it myself. So I had all these kind of things bounced around my head. And he said, people will want to learn from you, even if it's the same information, even if it is the same product, the same video, the same backdrop, the same production quality, whatever it is. People want you in front of it because there's an entertainment factor or whatever it is. And that really instilled, I guess, what we're talking about here in my mind of you can have the same product, same pricing, and the differentiator can very literally be the person listening to the show, right?
Absolutely. I want to, when I ring up one of my prospects or one of my clients, I want them to look at their caller ID and say, oh, it's Aaron. I better take this call because my life, my business, my objectives are going to be advanced by talking to him because that's the experience that they've had. Now, I can tell you a story also to give you an example. So there's a local bank that I want to work with. And I've reached out to all sorts of people at all levels of this bank in various ways, including on LinkedIn. And one of the people I reached out to, named April, is a senior vice president in this bank. And I reached out to her on LinkedIn with a kind of a regular touch. Here's a little something I thought you might find valuable. Here's another little something that I thought you might find valuable that I created. And here's another little something that I thought you might find valuable for this, that, and the other reason. Let me know what you think. And then eventually I said, hey, how about we've been LinkedIn connections for a while. How about we turn this into a real-time phone conversation? And the first thing she said when I got on the phone was, I never do this, right? I never accept these invitations, but there's something about your approach that made me interested. So I've created already a relationship in which she's seeing value. So she's willing to go against her usual pattern to have this conversation with me. And, I learned a little bit about her. She learned a little bit about what we do. She said, I'm interested and I'm not a buyer for this, right? In our organization, I'm just not somebody who would buy this. And I said, that's completely fine. And the way I do business, I like to make people's work lives better. That's, if there's any way, given what I do, that you can imagine I might be able to help you improve your work life, what would that be? She's already told me she's disqualified herself as a buyer for me. And she started to get into some story about something that she was facing at work, an interpersonal difficulty, which is one of the things that we work on with our clients. I spent 45 minutes with her learning more about that difficulty that she was facing and kind of coaching her through to some of her own realizations, and then also giving her a little bit of guidance about how I thought she might best overcome this challenge that she was facing. And at the end of that 45 minutes, she said, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Sure. Why would you do this? I said, well, you told me about a challenge and there it was in my space. I also know that what I do is almost impossible to describe in a way that people can really experience how valuable it could be. And so, it's an opportunity for me to plant in your brain some semblance of an understanding of the value of what we do. She said, you've got to meet my friend Scott. And so I met her friend Scott. She treated me and Scott to lunch to introduce us. And her understanding of his business was profound. I've never seen a banker know somebody else's business so well. She's been his banker since 1994 and really knew the ins and outs of his business, made the introduction. She watched me build a value-based relationship over lunch with him, not talking about sales at all. And now she is an advocate for the services that we provide. This person who disqualified herself in the first few minutes of our conversation is now making me money. So, you tell me.
So there's multiple things to go at here, and we'll move off the philosophy of sales in a second and into the practical elements of all of this, of how we can build these, to quote you, the Aaron, of value-based relationships. But for context, how many swings did you need to take at random people to find someone who is essentially now a referral partner, someone who can kind of network and link you to new potential customers? Does this happen once a year? Is this a one-off, kind of a story that has never been replicated? What I'm trying to get at is how much effort do we need to put in to see any results by kind of focusing on this?
I don't know. And I kind of don't.
We need more than that.
On some level, I don't care. Because I can tell you, my phone rang the other day also. Somebody I met, probably treated similarly 3 years ago. And she said, I've been keeping your card in my back pocket for 3 years until I was in a position to hire you. And I just knew as soon as those 3 years had elapsed, I would hire you. And I didn't, whatever exchange it was that we had the first time did not even register for me. I did not remember this person. She remembered me, and she kept her card she kept my card in her pocket for 3 years, not on the off chance that someday she could hire me, because she knew someday she would be ready, willing, and able to. And so I can't put a quantity on it. Here's a couple of the reasons that I know this works. One is I'm making a lot more money now than I was when I started this. And with relationships like April and relationships like this one that I just named with the business card, I can track it backwards and say, yes, this is now not just making me a sale, but making me a whole ecosystem that just keeps priming the pump. So, they talk about trading time for dollars. There's a way in which, because I'm a service-based business, I'm still doing that. On a prospecting respect, it's not how I operate anymore. I've got this machine that runs for me because of all the time that I've spent this way. Now, do I often spend 45 minutes coaching somebody through a difficult interpersonal situation at work? That's something that happens rarely. But they talk about mission, vision, and values. I've got something else that I add on to that suite that I call an action portal. And this is, in the fog of war, right, in the heat of the battle, what is the basis by which I'm going to make decisions? Is it to drive dollars? Is it to give my customers a great experience? For me, the action portal is I try to make people's work lives better. So in that conversation with April, I was able to say, oh, here's a way I can make her work life better. In another situation, I might sit at coffee and give away the farm, right? Basically, lay out a whole bunch of value on the table because I think it's going to make the work life better of the person sitting across from me. And what I've found is that creates as I said, an ecosystem or a machine that keeps feeding me. And then the other side of that, the other reason that I know this works is that I used to be a realtor. And when I was a realtor, over a decade ago now, I loved working with people. Once I had a client, it was fantastic. And I hated going to find and try to get my clients. I felt like I would walk into a room and I would look out at the room and I would see a bunch of meat and I could not get that out of my head. Mm-hmm. I could not figure out how to stop looking at the room that way. And I was miserable. I was miserable prospecting in that fashion. So the other way that this way works for me, this value-based relationships model works for me, is that I love every day. Whether I close a deal today or not, here I am talking with you in ways that I hope are going to make your work life better, in ways that I'm certain are going to make some of your listeners' work lives better. And that makes me jazzed. The only reason to get revenue for me is to have the life that I want. And so if I'm getting revenue to have the life that I want, but meanwhile I'm having a day where I feel like a miserable SOB, then what's the point of the revenue? Because I'm making myself miserable now for some future joy in spending that money. Screw it, Will. I'm not up for that.
So there's clearly a snowball effect here. And I know with the podcast and I can't remember the chap's name. Hopefully he appreciates the shout out, but there's a commercial drone operator and trainer here in Leeds, and he emailed me on LinkedIn, messaged me on LinkedIn. He was asking, we all enjoy the shows, anything you can do for my team? And clearly I mentioned the sales school, the new version that's coming out. And, I'm getting inbound leads by just putting out content. So I guess it's content marketing as well as a snowball effect of brand and trying to do the right thing and doing free consulting, essentially. I didn't even realize I've been doing it, but I've been doing that for the past 3 or 4 years as well. Whether it's good advice or bad advice is up to other people. But how much of this then is a snowball effect of being known in the marketplace as someone who gives value, is doing the right thing, and all the cliche things that we talk about? How much of it is a snowball effect of that versus the tactical, practical things that we do every day that you could sit down in a webinar and teach, rather than kind of missions and values and
right
and things along those lines?
So this is the third time I've been on your show, Will, and I'm not going to answer your question directly. I'm gonna kind of turn it back on you. This is the third time I've been on your show. There's a reason you've called me in a third time, and there's a reason that I've said yes a third time. And I've been a listener to your show since before the first time I was on, because I get a lot of value from it. So I think I already know the answer to this question, and that is, where would you be, Will, if you had gone about building your podcast from a strictly technical, tactical standpoint? In other words, you've gone out, dialing for dollars and kind of churning through as many leads as you could, as quickly as you could, to get the revenue in. Where would you be if you'd taken that approach?
So that's a massively leading question, and there's two elements to it, right? There's one of holy shit panic mode where there's not enough money in the bank to sustain things, where I do pick up the pace, I make more phone calls, and I'll proactively reach out and I'll drive the revenue to hit my own don't starve in your flat in leads kind of numbers.
Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
I do it too.
Yep. And everyone does. And there's a baseline there, right? And especially if there's entrepreneurs listening or founders listening and people of that nature, or just hit enough of your target so you don't get sacked, then there's the layer on top.
Absolutely. And by the way, I recommend Jeb Blount's book, Fanatical Prospecting, all the time, which really is about pick up the phone and dial one more call.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that I think that's crap, or that nobody should do that, or that anybody shouldn't do that. Please, I interrupted you.
Yep, and we clearly agree in this. But then there is a level beyond that where I can either spend time on the phone with people, I spend so much time doing emails. And at one point I engineered totally out of the podcast and the listeners, and the downloads didn't suffer, but I got a lot less, a lot fewer positive reviews and thank yous and things like this. And I measure a lot of our success on thank you emails, as ridiculous and as soft for a B2B sales podcast to be kind of talking about, versus the other people in the space, maybe like Jeb or Grant Cardone, people like that who are saying, well, revenue is all that matters. Once I get past that barrier of revenue, of everything's going fine, we can fund future projects like the sales school where we've got a bunch of developers and it's genuinely costing way more than I thought I ever would to put it together. Once I'm past that barrier, I do focus on the impact that we're having, because I want to do this over the next 10 years as opposed to kind of, as most people in sales jobs are looking at 1-2 years ahead. So this might be a potential thing to touch on in a second. But to answer your question and to wrap that up, Aaron, once I'm past the baseline, I am looking for impact and depth with people rather than a massive audience. So right now, as we record this, we don't do anything on LinkedIn. There's no videos going up there. The guests that come on the show, I send them a bunch of videos so they can promote the show if they like, because all my focus right now is on creating content for the sales school and getting the podcast out in a timely fashion, because the sales school right now, we've got over 1 million words of scripted content that I'm just about to start recording. And that
amazing.
That will have more. Don't thank me till you see it. It might be complete rubbish. Because I'm
getting
so
it down is amazing. And congratulations.
The
quality, I'll leave that to you.
Because I'm so in depth, like just with my head in a laptop now, writing all this stuff out and dictating it. That anyway, long story short, that is where the next lot of impact is going to happen, and there's going to be a substantial fee for people getting into the sales school. But, and I'll say it here, and this is the first time I mentioned it on the show, I'm pretty confident that the branding and the whole premise of the sales school is going to be that if you sign up, 12 months later, we'll give you your money back and some if you do not hit your sales target. The plan is to be the only sales training company on the planet that for individuals, every single person in the sales school, whether it's a big corporate account, whether it's an individual listen to the show, we're going to be guaranteeing your success. That is literally the whole premise of it, because we're so proud of the work that we've done and the depth that we've gone into it. And so, long story short, once I'm past calling for numbers, and I'm not going to starve to death, and obviously I'm never going to starve to death, but I don't literally mean that. Once I'm past that, I'm on about depth. If I was in medical device sales, I'd be hitting my target, and I'd be finding 3 or 4 surgeons that I want to be with. And I used to do this inadvertently. Every Friday, I'd come to Bradford Hospital, and I'd sit with some of the best colorectal surgeons in the world. I'd just hang out with them. I don't think it was particularly valuable. I was just around. I was a piece of the furniture. and they would knock off 20, 30% of my target every single year. So yeah, in answer to your question, once I get past that baseline, I am going on depth. And I think you would agree with that, right?
100%. I actually love your thank you email metric, because, if you think about a billboard, I pass 10, 15 billboards on my way into the office every day. I don't have any clue what most of them are for, and I certainly have never become a customer of something because of a billboard. There are even podcasts where I'm one of the downloads every week, because sometimes in the middle of the day, I need a nap. And very truly and literally, I have to put on, in order to have an effective nap in the middle of the day, I have to put on something that's just interesting enough that I don't want to turn it off, but not interesting enough that it keeps me awake. And so there are podcasts that I will turn on in order to get my quick nap in.
I do the
Yours
same.
is not
I
one of
listen
them.
to a particular Game of Thrones podcast where they recap stuff from the books. And
There you go.
yeah, so that's what I do to fall asleep as well.
So somewhere between, I use your podcast to take a nap, and I use your podcast and sit and transcribe every single word because it's that valuable to me. There's a spectrum of engagement. And so your thank you notes are a measure of that engagement, and your advertisers would be wise to listen to you about the number of thank you notes that you get, at least as much, if not more than, how many ears is your podcast reaching? Because who cares how many people hear the words if they're not paying attention? And so when you ask about, how much of it is about driving revenue, how much of it is about getting these value-based relationships, and how much of it really is about just building the brand over time till you reach a tipping point and things start to roll on their own. Well, I'll refer you back to my story about April. Because she has now introduced me to one of her valuable, very valuable to her, decades-long business contacts, right? One of her clients. She's invested something precious in me. Would she have done that otherwise? Does that contribute to what you called the snowball, or what I'm calling a tipping point? Way more than if I had gotten her on the phone, heard that she was disqualifying herself as a buyer for me probably ever, and then gone, okay, well, thank you for your time. Let me move on to somebody else, right? In that kind of like fanatical prospecting sense of, oh, you've disqualified yourself, I'm moving on. Instead, I said, okay, you've disqualified yourself. How else can I be of value to you? And I know from my own experience in my business, I know from my clients, I know from the people that I am a customer for, that having been valuable to her, she is now a bigger part of that snowball. She is a much bigger part of that tipping point for me. And because this is how I operate, even if I were to build a snowball the other way, it wouldn't be a flash in the pan, right? Or it would be a flash in the pan. This way, it's not going to be a flash in the pan. And this way, also, I'm not a realtor anymore, not because I couldn't make it or because I couldn't hack it, but because I burnt out on it. I burnt out on viewing everybody in my life as meat. I do not burn out ever, not even for a day, on providing value to people.
What does this look like from a practical standpoint then? Because I guess there's two layers to this. One element might be just asking, how else might I be of value to you, whether someone is qualified or not? So that might be one step. But I feel like there's another element here which you touched on, which is getting people to give back to us. So clearly relationships are built a lot faster when there's back and forth. We know that trust is built faster when there's back and forth. There's all kinds of data and metrics on all of this from different studies. So I guess a two-part question: what should we be doing to practically to get people to go, oh, this person isn't just a salesperson. They want to just give me free value with no ulterior motive, which may or may not lead to something useful in the future. And then how do we get something back off them, whether it's information, the time, their attention, whatever it is, so that we can serve them?
Okay, so I'll go through some advice you've heard a million times. One, listen to understand, not to respond. So, and I fall into this trap, right? I'll ask a prospect, what are your business goals for the year? What are your business goals for the quarter? What do you see getting in the way? And then I will listen for, how does my product fit in, or my service fit into that? That's crap, because it's transparent. People will hear it. People will see it. People will be turned off by it. When I'm really on my game, instead, I listen for understanding and how can I contribute to this, which very often might be, hey, you should listen to the Salesman Podcast episode number 25, because that's really going to help your sales team overcome this problem that you're talking about. Or, here's another podcast you should listen to. Here's another tool. Here's another resource. Or maybe, maybe you'd be interested in learning about how we've helped client XYZ address that same issue with the training that we provide. Because it's organic, because it really is a true and natural response to the goals and obstacles that they've named. So active, honest to God listening is a big part of that. And then the other thing that I would say is what I call being outcome agnostic. In other words, that you are open to who knows what the best outcome is here. I think the trap a lot of sales folks fall into is the right outcome is a sale to this person today, right? How do I put you, Will, in a used car today? What that does not include is the possibility that it's not a good idea for you to get into this used car today. And so anytime somebody asks me some form of that question, I'm very likely to say goodbye.
Yep. And why is that? What happens that makes you put your guard up?
Because exactly what I just said, that it presupposes that the best thing for me is a used car that you have. Maybe you don't have the right car for me. Maybe I should not get a new car at all, but that there's something I should be doing to my current car that will make it exactly the right one, that is actually the better decision for me. So to give you an example, Steve at Lexus of Tacoma, shout out Steve. When I bought my car from Steve, I showed up and the car was running and the heat was on. It was cold and rainy, so I was really grateful. He had the seat warmers on, and he sold me a used Volkswagen. And he was not usually in the used lot. It was just kind of the luck or unluck of the draw that day he was faced with a used car buyer, and for a Volkswagen that I wanted instead of for a Lexus. He had already done a bunch of research into, how to sync my phone up with the stereo. And then at the end of the test drive, instead of saying, when he said, what do you think? I said, well, there's another car 15 miles from here that I want to go drive before I buy this one. And I was all ready for him to say, well, what do I need to do so that you don't go drive that car? Which is what I've heard a million times. Instead, he said, okay. And it blew my mind that he said, okay, because he knows, as you and I do, that to make a decision of that kind, a few tens of thousands of dollars, and I'm going to be spending hours of my life in this vehicle, that it's a good idea to go and kick a few tires, not just one set.
Yeah.
So he said, okay. And here I am 5-6 years later telling you about Steve at Lexus of Tacoma. And I don't mind the fact that I'm giving him a major plug because I want him to thrive, because he was human with me. He put my interests ahead of his. And when you say, what do I need to do to convince you to go my way? That is a clear and present signal that your interests are first in your mind, not mine. And I will always give my business to somebody whose interests are mine, even if it means spending a little bit more money or a little bit more time, because at the end of the day, I just appreciate that person.
So I'd call this outcome independence. You defined it as outcome agnostic. Same meaning, different words. Where does this issue lie? Because I'll totally lead you down the garden path here, because I believe that there's perhaps two areas where it could be that, and tell me if you feel like I'm on the right tracks with this, that it's either you've not got enough stuff in your pipeline so that you have to be bothered, otherwise you're not going to hit your targets. I mean, you go below that baseline that we were talking about earlier on, where you do have to close a percentage of people, otherwise you're going to get sacked. So it's one element of this, I feel, is you don't have enough in your pipeline, and the other is perhaps that you're told to do this, and this is the way that it's been done, and this is the way that you've been trained. Out of those two options, Aaron, which has the biggest leverage point in making people behave this way, when clearly we wouldn't want anyone to behave like this to us?
I don't know. What I do know is that it's fear, right? It's fear that has us behave in ways towards other people that we would never want them to behave toward us. We're afraid of getting sacked. We're afraid of not hitting our target. We're afraid of ridicule or rejection, right? Those are all these things that are kind of deeply programmed into our psyches and into our biology, frankly. That's what has it happen. I remember, again, if I go back to being a realtor and walking into these rooms and seeing a bunch of meat, that was fear, right? It was fear that even by being there, I would not be able to make my living. And so I would walk in and my fear translated all these people for me into meat. And I remember, my mentors at the time would say things like, go and offer value, be of value, bring value. And I would ask them what the heck that meant, and they could not give me a cogent answer.
That's been about 50 episodes of this podcast, and I've asked that same question to people when we've been discussing it.
And I remember going to another networking event many years later, and I walked in with a man who was, seemed shy. He was kind of only giving people kind of furtive, cursory glances, essentially no eye contact, hunched body language. He just looked very uncomfortable. And I started a conversation with him, and I learned that he had just moved to Seattle from Georgia. And so I talked about what a change in climate that must be, not just the weather, but also the social, cultural climate, and learned that he was here with a credit union. He was their first Spanish-speaking loan officer, because they wanted to break into the Spanish-speaking market, and they hadn't got any traction there in the past. So they needed a Spanish-speaking loan officer. That was the story that he told me. And I said a few words to him. I said, wow, you must be really valuable to them. Just was what occurred to me watching this fellow, getting to like him, and learning what the position was that he was in this bank and how that fit into that bank's goals. And by saying that, by naming to him how much value he must have with that company, I watched him stand up a little bit straighter, and then I watched him go around the room speaking to people in ways that he had not been speaking to people before speaking with me. And my whole sense of how to provide value to people, my whole sense of what that expression means or what it can mean changed, and also my effectiveness as a salesperson has completely gone through the roof, because now there's so much different value that I can offer. I'm no longer trying to find coupons for people. I'm no longer trying to figure out exactly how to shoehorn my service offerings into the gap that they have named. I'm simply looking for, where is there opportunity that exists in this person's life of any kind? And or what can I see? What am I seeing that I value and that I can be a reflection of that value for them? It has changed my life, and I love sales now.
So one last thing to wrap up on this before the final question I ask you every time you come on the show that I'll have to put some kind of spin on in the moment as we go through it. But answering the question, what is value, or how do we add value? There seems like there's a framework here of the fundamental level is being outcome independent or outcome agnostic, so that you can give literal advice and you're not coloring it or tainting it. And I think other people would argue with you that to a certain extent, Aaron, but I'm more on your side of it of, yes, I'd rather kind of build not necessarily relationships. I'd rather give good advice that eventually does snowball into me becoming known as a trusted advisor or industry expert or all these things where a lot of the hard work is then done for you. You don't need to build trust because it's already there. People can Google you, all this kind of stuff. So the fundamental level seems to be that. The next level on top of it seems to be active listening, so that we are very literally, and because it's one thing to say it's another thing to do it. Even in these podcasts, I have to not be looking at my notes, not be thinking of the next question, and try and be as proactive as well as manage the conversation as what I can. But being proactive with our listening and really intently trying to help the other person and paying attention to the nuances of what they're saying and the issues that they may have. Is there any other layers? Are there any other layers to this that we can add to it, or is that the good kind of or the best foundation for this that the audience can, Sales Nation can use kind of straight after this podcast and they can put into practice today?
Sure. I mean, one of the things about being outcome agnostic is that, well, where do you define outcome, right? So again, if I go back to the story I was telling about the woman who held my card in her pocket for 3 years, and I assume she was being metaphorical about the pocket, right? But I don't know when the outcome, I never knew when the outcome was going to be. So part of being outcome agnostic is to know that the outcome, wherever you are, even if you've made the sale or if you've been told to piss off, the outcome has not happened yet. The outcome you never get there. So I keep following up and I keep following up and I keep following up. And it may be, that I slow my outreach down to once a quarter or once every half a year, but I never stop reaching back to the people that I've made contact with. And I never stop reaching back to the people I've failed to make contact with. So that one of the things that happens as a result of being outcome agnostic is that I simply don't know when or if the outcome has arrived.
Interesting. I've never really thought about it like that before. Other people I'm going to butcher who said this now, but someone came on the show and said along the lines of a no is just a yes, but not right now, or something along those lines. That kind of fills in of, apart from we're talking more Schrodinger's cat here, as opposed to yes or no's, right? Of it just doesn't exist. If the tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, who knows? Things may change, things may kind of turn. This is one of the reasons one of the problems I have with spamming out really crappy cold email. You can very quickly burn a marketplace, and especially when this is all tied back to your LinkedIn profile, because you're half-arsed cold emailing and you're half-arsed social selling, you're getting the worst bits of both ends of those strategies, and people remember you and know you as that idiot who was just spamming the crap out of them. And this is especially true
with a name like Schmookler.
Yeah, an amazing name like Schmookler. But and this is especially true for anyone who's brand new to sales, who perhaps doesn't realize what they're doing right now in this moment. So that's kind of a word for warning for anyone who's being pushed into the world of just mindless cold emailing, and you plan on staying within a specific marketplace for a long period of time. Well, with that, Aaron, let's wrap up, mate, with the one question that I ask everyone that comes on the show. And I feel like we covered a lot of ground here. And I'll put this kind of framework, I'll build it out a little bit into a blog post, and we'll put it in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. But Aaron, to wrap up, mate, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self. No, if you go back in time. No, here we go. If you were at this moment in time, you just got a book deal and you were writing a sales book, and your grandchildren or great-grandchildren were going to read it. So it's got to be timeless advice. What is the one thing that you'd put in that book that your grandchildren or great-grandchildren, you'd want to tell them to help them become better at sales?
Be a part of the gratitude economy, I think is what I would say. And I'll elaborate a little bit, right? Is that how put money in the bank, keep offering value in whatever ways you can find to do that, so that you are building up a savings account in every relationship in your life. Build into that gratitude economy. And I was listening to your podcast on my drive this morning, and you asked, what's your favorite book, I think, to somebody. Or maybe it was, I think I may be mixing you up with Pete Mockaitis today, but another great podcast.
I take massive offense to that as well.
You should not, because Pete's podcast is superb. But somebody said their favorite book was The Go-Giver. And one of the rules in The Go-Giver, and I'm going to butcher this, is essentially also take. So don't just put into the gratitude economy, like a miser puts money into a savings account. Also, be on the lookout for when and where people are trying to offer you value, and be gracious in taking and experiencing that gratitude yourself, so that you really are an active giver and taker in that gratitude economy.
It may well have been this show, because that book has come up a bunch of times, and I've interviewed Bob Burger a bunch of times as well. And that is something that's really important. And I'm glad you wrapped up the show with this, because I don't want that message to get lost. And Gary Vaynerchuk talks about jab, jab, right hook. And the audience will see this probably 2 or 3 months after this episode comes out, when the new sales school launches. I'll be ramming it down everyone's throat as hard and as much as what I possibly can, because I've given now, I think, it'll be just over 2 years since I've launched, advertised, or promoted a product on the platform. And every episode will have an advert for the sales school. There'll be kind of competitions or launches or marketing, and everyone will be retargeted probably about 2 or 3 months or so, and then it'll all go away, and then we'll go back to kind of just giving that value. And it's different from a marketing standpoint, with kind of somewhat passive messaging, as opposed to, I'm not clearly cold calling everyone who listens to the show, because I'd have to hire a team of people to do it. There's no way I'd be able to do it on my own. But I think that's a really important thing. And I think, and I touched on this earlier on, it does deepen relationships, right? When you give, and someone gives you an industry piece of information, or something specific to the account, or something that can help you with somewhere else. It doesn't have to be the deal, but that back and forth, it's everything, right?
And people ask me, how can I help you today? If I don't have an answer to that question, I have failed. I've failed the relationship. I've failed myself. I've failed my business. So, always know how somebody can help you. Be also engaged in that end of the question. It really is an economy. It really is an ecosystem of symbiotic relationships when it's really working well, when you are an organic part of it.
Good stuff. Well, with that, Aaron, for everyone who wants to learn more about you and everything that you're up to over at the Yes Works, tell us where we can find out more about you, sir, and then the business side of things as well.
Sure. Well, I've appeared now 3 times on an absolutely fantastic podcast called the Salesman Podcast with Will Barron. So you can find me and some of my thoughts around sales there. You can also find me at theyesworks.com, and I'm the only Aaron Schmookler on LinkedIn that I know of. So I'm also very active there on LinkedIn. And heck, look me up if you're ever in Tacoma, Washington, or Seattle. Be happy to have coffee with anybody who reaches out and see if we might be able to add value to one another's lives.
Good stuff. Well, I'll link to that, the previous episodes, in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.org as well. And with that, Aaron, I want to thank you for your time. And I think I said this last time, your unique insights on this. It's refreshing me. I appreciate them. And it, inadvertently, maybe not inadvertently, maybe I have you on the show often because it does reflect some of my thoughts subconsciously, I guess. And with that, mate, I want to thank you again for joining us on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on, Will. I almost said you've built something that you can be proud of. I'll correct myself to say you are building something that really deserves your having a lot of pride. It's valuable, and it's very impressive what you've done. And so I look forward to seeing where you go from here.